So, is caste a pure figment, the invention of Orientalists for their own glorification? A paper by former Professor Declan Quigley of University of St Andrews, from where he was fired with a lot of after a lot of quarrel. The reasons are unknown to us. The year was 1988. So let's see what this paper says.
ऐगिरिनन्दिनि नन्दितमेदिनि विश्वविनोदिनि नन्दिनुते गिरिवरविन्द्यशिरोदिनि वासिनि विष्णुविलासिनि जिष्णुनुते भगवति हेशिति कण्ठकुटुम्बिनि भूरि कुटुम्बिनि भूरि कृते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते सुरवरवर्षिणि दुर्धरदर्शिनि दुर्मुखमर्षिनि हर्षरते त्रिभुवनपोषिणि शङ्करतोषिनि किल्बिषमोषिनि घोषरते धनुजनिरोषिनि दिथिश्रुतरोषिनि दुर्मथतोषिनि सिन्धुषुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते जय जय हे महिषासुरमर्दिनि रम्यकपर्दिनि शैलसुते.
Hi guys, thank you for joining the live stream. I hope the audio is coming fine. It is coming fine, right? Okay. So I'm in a bit of a hurry today because I plan to do another very important stream on a very important paper. That one is a bit longer. This one is just 18 pages, and I plan to do that after this before my dinner. So I'm not going to be looking at the comment section too much. I'll just keep an eye on for if anyone mentions that the audio is not coming fine, etc. For those kinds of things. Otherwise, I won't be interacting too much. Maybe with just the members a little. Otherwise, I'm going to mainly go on discussing this paper, okay? And I have no idea what this paper says, so I'm very curious because the title of the art essay seems to be very interesting, and this paper was sent to me by a mysterious sociologist. 12 बजे नहीं मेरी रात्रि पार्टी 12 बजे नहीं होगा अभी मेरा स्लीप साइकिल थोड़ा इंडियन है अभी. So, is caste a pure figment, the invent of Orientalists for their own glorification? Author Declan Quigley. Where was it published? The Cambridge Journal of Anthropology, 1988. Wow. Okay, let's see. This will be interesting. You all can read it, right? So, Declan Quigley writes, yeah, so this is the, can I increase the size a little more? Let's see, so you all can read it too. Is caste a pure figment? The invention of Orientalists for their own glorification. Once upon a time, not so very long ago, let me put this in front of my face so I don't have to look up all the time. Okay, it looks very weird. Yeah, so once upon a time, not very long ago, idealist theories in anthropology meant explaining other societies in terms of their ideas. This was false, but it had merit of taking other cultures seriously and not considering them as mere mystification. The latest wave of idealism does not have this merit. Its adherents appear to claim that any description or analysis of another society says a great deal more about our ideas than theirs. Indeed, if one follows this new wave logic, it is no longer clear how one would ever get to know them at all. Invariably, the new idea. So, if you judge everyone, or let's say even if you try to know everyone from their lens, it might not be fruitful for the outsider because that outsider does not have that lens, and that outsider probably can't even imbibe that lens. Like just like Rajesh Nandi was saying in a recent podcast, I think with Beer Biceps only, in the recent Makali podcast, that foreigners who take up Hinduism after the age of 18, he doesn't really take them that seriously or doesn't trust them all that much. He was saying something to this effect, because the mental constitution, the epistemic understanding of things, the way of looking at things is already so far gone if you're born outside India or born outside Hinduism, that especially if you are a non-Hindu from outside India, then it's probably you're not going to get or grasp the thing fully. Maybe some people can, maybe Conrad Elst, David Frawley, they have, because they are such fabulous scholars, but most people probably can't. So this is where Declan Quigley comes in with his explanation. So, invariably, the new idealists claim to be post something or other, post structuralist, post Marxist, or whatever. Often they claim inspiration from Foucault and Derrida, and they like to style themselves as deconstructionists. Derrida was a famous scholar who came to the Kolkata Book Fair as well when Jyoti Basu was the chief minister. This is revealing. The central aim is to dismantle prior knowledge, which is claimed to be a distortion of reality. The implication and sometimes overt accusation is that such distortions conceal deeply rooted prejudices which have shaped knowledge in such a way as to bolster historical power structures. What happens after the deconstruction, how exactly one would get clearer access to reality is not always spelled out. There are echoes here of Mannheim's ideology and utopia, which is once one gets rid of some interfering mechanism, such as class interests, the truth will reveal itself automatically, as it were. Perhaps the very aspiration to get at truth is now regarded as a dangerous fantasy. It would not be the first time that this has been suggested. If it is not entirely clear what is being prescribed, there is less doubt about what has been proscribed. For the new wave is nothing less than a moral crusade. It is essentially, and I think a very illiberal one at that. It's not supposed to be done in the realm called liberal arts or liberal academia. Okay, liberal arts studies, social science. Okay, it's supposed to teach you how to think, not what to think. It is essentially an expiation for the sins of our imperialist ancestors, and woe betide those who would question the need for it. They run the risk of being branded as rednecks, or meaning far-right villager type conservatives of America, or worse still, as guilt-free stalwarts of the ever more intrusive cultural imperialism of the West. Sometimes there seems to be a hint that we should revert to the old kind of idealist explanation, quote unquote, let them speak for themselves, the lived experience argument. Okay. But there is no clear consensus about this. One obvious reason for the lack of consensus is that many of the societies studied are themselves extremely hierarchical, and the question of who speaks for the society as a whole is very problematic. Don't we know? Is caste a pure figment? This is certainly the case for the sociology of South Asia, which seems to be coming increasingly to the attention of the new movement. The principal defendant on trial is the concept of caste, and the allegation appears to be that caste is little other than the invention of European colonialists for their own glorification. Making Indians appear prisoners of this outrageous institution was, it is argued, a strategy of Western observers, which contributed to the political subjugation of the East while simultaneously reinforcing the moral righteousness of the values underpinning Western institutions. Here I will examine two related questions which this raises. The first question is, has the European preoccupation with caste been justified, or is it, as alleged, a distortion of Indian history and society? So they are writing this in 1988, but we outside academia did not even know that there are counters to the casteism of Hinduism argument. Declan Quigley is trying to analyze that argument, that, okay, is it really so that it's the evil Westerners talking about caste? The second is, if it is in some sense possible to isolate caste as a distinct principle of social organization, how is this principle manifested in actual or historical social groups? The two questions can be rephrased as follows. Does caste exist? Do castes exist? However unfashionably, I will suggest that the unequivocal answer to both questions is yes. The inclination to ask them at all may well raise some eyebrows among those anthropologists who have been steeped, some would say pickled, in the empiricist tradition. For many of these traditionalists, castes obviously exist, and caste is obviously the dominant principle of social organization in Hindu India, as it is indeed in much of non-Hindu India too. Scores of ethnographic and census reports prove this fact beyond doubt. Though the most celebrated Dumont, I don't know if it's pronounced Dumont, maybe Gayatri Spivak can forgive me. Dumont was not, of course, the first to argue that the substantialization of castes was misguided. Among others, he cites in admiration, Ketkar, Blunt, O'Malley, Ghure, and Mayer in support of the structuralist idea that there is no privileged level at which groups called castes exist. Inden, in his Orientalist constructions of India, shifts this argument one big step further. In so doing, he berates Dumont and the earlier proto-structuralists for substantializing caste. At the very time, the Frenchman and his predecessors were insisting on the insubstantial nature of castes. Let's see. Essentially, I will argue that none of these three positions has a great deal to recommend it. Inden's bottom line argument, as far as one can discern what it is either spurious or dangerously misleading, though many of his observations are acute and incontrovertible. Dumo, I would argue, is right about the structural, that is, relational nature of caste, but wrong about its axis. And consequently, he's wrong about the insubstantial nature of castes. His crime is not so much that he substantiated caste, but that he substantialized purity and pollution. Now it will get interesting. The empiricists, I will argue, are generally right, though more often than not for the wrong reason. Castes do indeed exist, but the facts are often far from clear about why this should be so. The first reason for this is that the word fact in relation to caste is extremely problematic. That Brahmins are sometimes priests is a fact. That quote unquote the supremacy of the Indian priest is an Indian fact, as Dumo said in 1980, is not a fact, but an observation soaked through with preconceptions about the nature of Hindu society. The view of caste which dominates both popular representations by Hindus themselves, okay, the view of caste which dominates both popular representations by Hindus themselves and descriptions by outside observers from at least the 16th century up to the present day runs something like this. 1. The Hindu world is made up of a number of castes. Castes. 2. Castes are closed social groups. One may only marry within one's caste, and in this way, the system is perpetuated ad infinitum, the children of the marriage belonging to the caste of their parents. 3. Castes are hierarchically ranked on a purity pollution scale according to their traditional functions. Intensive historical and ethnographic investigations of caste organized communities in India have repeatedly demonstrated quite clearly that this three-line theory is at best inadequate, at worst wholly misleading. And yet, in spite of this, it has remained remarkably resistant to attempts to modify it. Yeah. Implicit in any theory of caste should be an explanation not only of where the three-line theory has gone astray, but why it has been so doggedly held on to when it is obviously unsatisfactory. This is something I've been saying since the beginning of my channel. Old subscribers will remember that I've always been saying that actually this was my first argument in favor of why sociology should be, let's say, defunded, because they have not been able to solve caste. They are pointing the gun in the wrong direction. The first difficulty in sorting out these problems is that often they have little to do with caste as such, and have much more to do with the kind of epistemologies which underlie comparative sociology. Both Inden and Dumo make it clear that this is what is really at issue. To challenge the interpretation of caste, which either both sets out, or both sets out, is to deal less with Indian facts and more with the nature of comparative sociological explanation. Nice. Both of these authors appear to have a certain disdain for facts. Inden's critique of Orientalism would appear to be directed as much at anthropology in the accounts of the other, generally as at the analysis of India in particular. The discourse on India simply happens to be the one he is most familiar with. I take the position that those facts themselves have been produced by an episteme, quote unquote, a way of knowing that implies a particular view of existence, which I wish to criticize. The episteme at issue presupposes a representational view of knowledge. This is what Inden said in 1986. Dumo's anti-empiricism is well known. He said, the fact remains that the empirical approach is a misconstruction of Indian civilization. It amounts to assimilating dharma to artha, end quote. Dumo said this in 1980. How then to challenge either of these two positions? One cannot appeal to the facts, since these, it is alleged, are the very problem, because the facts are the problem apparently. Empiricists are not only condemned for having missed the point. Like fish out of water, they are made to appear ridiculous, gasping helplessly once their sole means of sustenance, which is observation, is removed. For the anti-empiricists, the main issues submerged in an epistemological quagmire are no less than the status of Western philosophy and scientific knowledge. These must be dealt with, it is claimed, before we get to India. But with post-Hegelianism, post-Marxism, post-structuralism, and deconstructionism for breakfast, would anyone have the stomach for the time for lunch, or the time for lunch? A more digestible solution might be to enter into the spirit of the critics of empiricism, to pretend for a moment that we are not really talking about facts at all, and to turn to invention. Of course, the invention must be plausible. It must somehow resemble what one might find in India, but this immediately returns us to those murky epistemological waters, representational views of knowledge, and so on. Ignoring this sticky problem for the time being, let me confidently assert that what takes place next is not a record of the situation in any particular place, as it really is, but an abstract model. In this case, it is a model of the kind of conversation discourse, if you prefer, which typically takes place between an anthropologist or any other outsider and certain Indians, Nepalis, Sri Lankans, Balinese, etc. Whenever the former, the anthropologist, is trying to find out which caste someone he cannot place belongs to, quote unquote, belongs to, precisely which Indians, Nepalis, etc., such a conversation could take place with itself, with is itself very revealing. Okay, listen to this. Precisely which Indians, Nepalis, etc., such a conversation could take place with is itself very revealing. It shows you. For purposes of exposition, the conversation is in English, and it quickly becomes apparent that there is a difficulty with the word caste itself. Okay, everything fine in the comment section, right? Okay, yeah. So listen to this. There is a difficulty with the word caste itself. The outsider who hopes to solve the problem by resorting to native terminology soon discovers that this is no solution at all. The Sanskrit or Hindi word jati causes just as much difficulty as the English or French word caste. The problem is rather to do with the quality of casteness or jatiness, jatitva, or whether indeed such a quality can be said to exist at all. I guess jatiness should be translated to jatitva. Oh, okay. So we are now going to listen to a conversation, okay, between an outsider and an insider. What caste are you? We are Kshatriyas. Who may you marry? We may only marry other Kshatriyas. There are people in the next village who say they are Kshatriyas. Presumably you can marry with them? No, they are not like us, not the same caste. But you said you are Kshatriya, and they say they are Kshatriya. So why can you not intermarry? Well, in the first place, they say they are Kshatriya, but how do we know who they are? And in the second place, even if they are Kshatriya, they are not the same caste as we are. So we can't marry with them. But who is the same caste as you? Well, those people we can marry with. The logic of this is not, of course, as circular as it might at first appear, right? As the conversation progresses, it becomes obvious that the word caste is being used in two different senses. In the first place, to refer to a Varna, namely Kshatriya, and in the second place, to identify another grouping which has yet to be specified. The insider is saying something like, let's say, we must marry people from the same Varna Kshatriya, but that's not enough. They must also belong to the same caste. Let's say he uses the word Jati for this second sense. The outsider now realizes he could have avoided this misunderstanding if he had, in the first place, asked, what is your Jati? Guys, this paper is from 1988. Instead of, what is your caste? He now understands that the insider has said something like this. Like many other people, our Varna is Kshatriya, but it is the Jati which must be taken into account when considering a marriage. He continues. So, you can only marry people belonging to your own Jati? Yes. Does your Jati have a name? Of course, we are Rajputs. So you can marry the Rajputs in the next village? Oh no, we never marry them. They are not the same caste as we are. But you are Rajputs and they are Rajputs, so how can you not be the same caste? Well, in the first place, they say they are Rajputs, but how do we know who they are? And anyway, even if they are Rajputs, they are not the same caste as we are, so we don't marry them. So who do you marry? I've told you that already. We marry the people who are the same caste as we are, the same Jati, the people we have always married. But you've just said that your Jati is Rajput, yet there are some Rajputs you can't marry because they don't belong to your Jati. Surely this is a contradiction. What one means by one's Jati depends on the context. In one sense, all Rajputs are alike and are different from those who are not Rajputs. In another sense, Rajputs are themselves divided into many different groups which do not intermarry because they are different. This leaves two major questions unresolved. One, what do the groups which actually intermarry look like? Two, what, if any, is the correspondence between the way in which these are arranged and the way in which the four Varnas are arranged? The first question we may now regard as sub judice, since its quote-unquote solution in the various ethnographies has been challenged as being ideologically unsound by the deconstructionists. Their challenge is that the very idea of caste is the product of imperialist Europeans intent on finding bizarre social and cultural practices with which to lampoon the unsuspecting Oriental. The still widespread view about the second question is that Varna is simply a theoretical category never actually encountered on the ground, while Jati is the real operational unit, the real caste. According to this view, which many Hindus themselves profess, the word is actually made up of units called Jati, any one of which can, in theory, be slotted into one of the four embracing Varna categories, Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, or into the residual category of untouchables. The trouble with this opinion is that more often than not, it does not work when applied to actual situations. This is something Madam political scientist had once pointed out. I was having a debate with her once that what Varna is this Jati? How is this Jati not the same as this some other Varna? And why is this Jati in this Varna in this state? Why is this same Jati in a different Varna in that state? She actually pointed out to me that you can't force fit, retrofit, or extrapolate Jatis into Varnas all the time. They just don't work. And it's somehow not common knowledge outside the academia. But Jatis are different Varnas in different states. Maybe even different Varnas in different villages. The trouble with this opinion is that more often than not, it does not work when applied to actual situations. There is endless dispute about relative statuses, endless claim and counterclaim about which Jati belongs to which Varna and which does not, as the following table adapted from Parry's 1979 book or work Caste and Kingship in Kangra Caste and Kingship, not Kingship, Caste and Kingship in Kangra demonstrates. Indeed, I would hazard that the ascription of a particular Varna to any particular caste is always problematic, exactly what Madam Political Scientist had told me. Much more problematic than Parry indicates. So let's see. Let me check some comments for a while. I'll just give my throat a little bit of a rest. Nandish is saying best example would be Khatris. There are Muslim Khatris, Hindu Khatris, and Sikh Khatris as well. Okay. Consider Jats. There are Hindu Jats, Sikh Jats, and they intermarry. Right. Jatis and Varna are different. Yeah. So, table 1, a typical caste hierarchy. Brahman, landowners and priests. Bhojki, temple priests. These, I guess, can be, or maybe he is saying that it sometimes is, they are sometimes in the Brahman Varna. So Rajputs, landowners and warriors, and Mahajan, trader. Oh, no. Rajputs and landowners and Rajputs who are landowners and warriors, they are Kshatriya. Mahajan traders are Vaishya. Turkhan, who are carpenters, Lohar, blacksmiths. Sonyar or Sonyar, I guess, goldsmith. Nai, barber. Kumhar, potter. Girth or Girth, cultivator. Koli, cultivator. So Virat Kohli is discussed. Jogi, beggar and ascetic. Jullaha, Sanhai. Sanhai is a music instrument in Bengali. Shahnai, I guess it probably has nothing to do with that. Dumna, basket maker. Chamar, tanner. Bhangi, sweeper. Most people would say that all these castes are Shudras, but on occasion, castes of categories 5 and 6, meaning these Turkhan, Lohar, Sonyar, Nai, Kumhar, Girth, and Koli, and 7 will claim to be either Kshatriya or Brahman. So Jogi, beggar and ascetic, they will often claim to be Kshatriya or Brahman. Look, confusion shuru. This is adapted from Parry's work from 1979, his work on Kangra. In fact, as Parry's and other detailed ethnography demonstrates, it is not only the question of Varna affiliation which is problematic. Who exactly belongs to which Jati is also often a subject of considerable dispute. The evidence, never far away, seems to suggest that the idea that castes are in general, bounded groups with a fixed membership is simply untenable. To set out, see, the problem is, look, most of you all know that I am also against caste-based discrimination. A lot of my viewers today think I'm a Brahmin hater also for some reason. But you see, why this needs to be pointed out, that these kinds of stupid extrapolations are problematic. They are untenable because your gun is pointed in the wrong direction. If you don't diagnose the problem properly, how will you solve the problem? A fever is a disease, and someone with a broken leg is also has a disease and needs some medicines. But if you were in an accident and you go to your general medicine, let's say local doctor, and you say, just give me some cool medicine, will your leg, which is hanging off and is about to fall off, will that be healed? You have to diagnose it properly and treat it properly. So my point is, if at all, I've not reached any conclusion by reading half of this paper, right? But all I'm saying is, let's say this is absolutely the fact, what Declan Quigley is saying here, that these things are untenable, these extrapolations are untenable. Then we have to look at other ways of solving casteism or caste-based bad behavior. Okay, capitalism is of course one way, but more importantly, you have to, if at all you have to produce scholarship which you think is going to help solve the casteism problem, you have to analyze it very properly. I believe castes are just status groups, simply as Max Weber had said. So what we are trying to solve here is staticism. How are you going to solve staticism when you are trying to base it on the teachings of Manusmriti, etc.? Okay, you're not going to solve staticism by criticizing Manusmriti. because everywhere there will be staticism. Okay, let's say when I criticize the Bengal art and culture intelligentsia for having mainly Brahmins, I mean that as a status. I don't mean that as something Rajamanu would have liked or intended. Okay, but let's say that staticism, that only Brahmin kind of staticism does not exist in Bollywood, right? But Bollywood, everyone says newcomers, struggling artists, people who don't have godfathers, they still say that it's sort of a closed family group, right? So if it's not the Brahmins in Bollywood, how is that same staticism still happening in Bollywood? So is your goal then to solve that staticism, the bad behaviors coming out of that staticism, or to just look at problems inside Hinduism, find out random quotes from Gita and Manusmriti, and you think you'll solve that staticism? Okay, you're going to always point the gun in the wrong direction. To set out with such an idea is to embark on a path of endless frustration. Unless it won't lead to endless frustration if you get paid to just criticize the Manusmriti forever and after. Okay, you're not going to solve the problem, but you'll get paid. You won't even be frustrated. Just keep writing out hot shit. Sometimes the boundaries of castes are relatively unambiguous. Sometimes they are extremely fuzzy. Sometimes it is relatively straightforward to say who belongs to a caste and who does not. Sometimes it is impossible. Let's see. Let me check some comments. Nina is saying Manusmriti was in fact written at least 1,000 years before caste ratification truly began during Gupta rule. Manu allocated 25%. No text was written as an unchangeable work. The present versions of these texts are highly edited. Yes. Sometimes it is impossible. This difficulty of defining jatis unambiguously, both in relation to each other and in relation to the fourfold Varna system, appears to be characteristic of all caste systems. This introduces what might be called the caste dilemma, quote unquote, for comparative sociologists, that is, anthropologists, historians, etc. On the other hand, on the one hand, one has little opinion but to retain the word caste or jati as a referent for actual social groups. On the other hand, these groups do not always, or maybe do not ever, have the characteristics which castes are generally thought to have. Namely, what you're looking for is unambiguous closure and unambiguous rank, which it doesn't fucking have. Then what do we do? There are those who argue that the use of the word caste as a referent for social groups should be altogether abandoned. Listen to this. 1988, Declan Quigley is a Oh, my internet was gone. Yeah, thankfully I'm back now. Let me just check from my phone कहाँ तक मैं बोल पाया. एक मिनट रुको, ठीक है? एक मिनट में मुझे खुद के चैनल से सुन लेने दो. Let me know if the audio now is coming fine. All of a sudden, that StreamYard window went away, and then I realized that the internet is gone. Let me know if the audio. Let's see. कहाँ तक बोला मैंने? Word caste as a referent for social groups should be altogether abandoned. Listen to this. 1988, Declan Quigley is right. So what I was saying is that 1988, Declan Quigley is making a point, or at least treating this argument with some, let's say, he's at least responding to this argument, which is today considered a far right Hindu fascist argument. Okay, that uh, how about not using the word caste at all? But of course, inside academia, it can't be done. It's just too tall a battle to win unless you get a magic wand to change people's minds all of a sudden one fine morning. But outside academia, if it happens, I have no problem. I wouldn't oppose it. But inside the academia, I don't think it's a battle worth picking. That's all. Okay, let me check some comments a bit, and then I'll get to this paper again. So Nandish is saying, from where I am from, Karnataka, each jati has their own variation of the language, even variations of words that can't be understood by others, but that too changes from region to region. Okay. What is this comment? Kshatra Pavan is saying, many Mahars, Ambedkar Jati claim to be Kshatriyas, even Valmikis or Bhangis claim to be descendants of Brahmins. Yes. In different states, so different things. S. Raul is saying, the political aspects of these texts were certain. Okay. Yeah, we'll discuss this. Were certainly inserted later and with the demands of the times, right? Shatrapavan is saying, funny part about Jati Varna is that you will find many Jatis claiming to be one of the first three Varnas, but it's hard to find Jatis who self-claim to be Shudra. Yes, of course, it's all incentive structures. That's what we are always trying to point out. दादा ये पेपर कहाँ मिलेगा? JSTOR में मिल जाएगा. Your half face is hidden. Why is my face hidden now? एक मिनट रुको. Yeah, it's all fine now. Okay. Yeah, ये half ही रहना है. Sorry. Okay, now we'll continue. So you'll find this paper in another website. I think you'll find it on JSTOR and on Google Scholar, etc. I forget the website, and libgen.rs or something. So the difficulty of defining jatis unambiguously both in relation to each other and in relation to the fourfold Varna system appears to be characteristic of all caste systems. This introduces what might be called the caste dilemma for comparative sociologists. There are those who argue that the use of the word caste as a referent for social groups should be altogether abandoned. So much confusion does it cause. But as I have shown in my constructed conversation, reversion to native terminology does not solve the problem. We are left with the difficulty of what to call the social groups one encounters on the ground. The conventions of caste, subcaste, and jati are too well established to be conjured away by mere academic wishful thinking, however well intentioned. See, he is at least taking that argument seriously, that it might be well intentioned. Maybe you are trying to solve the problem better by not using the word caste. Magar usse hoga nahi. For hundreds of millions of people, these groups have a reality. Dumo's attempted solution to this problem of caste affiliation is to suggest that there is no definitive operational unit at all, and that the boundaries of any caste are always completely dependent on the context. So, sounds fair enough. It is only our modern empiricism, he argues, which propels us to seek out and find bounded units, things with substance. What we ought to be looking for, he insists, are the underlying principles which are not dependent on context for structure, not substance. Okay, look for the structure, not the substance. Look for the framework. Dumo writes, substantially, we reduce everything to a single plane of consideration: the individual man or the nation or the caste. Structurally, the caste appears in certain situations and disappears in others in favor of larger or smaller entities. Here, there is not, as in our universe of the individual, a privileged level. In particular, we shall see that the various properties of caste are attached to different levels of the phenomenon. Dumo writes this in 1980. My own view is that the structuralist approach to caste is as uniquely penetrating as it is poorly understood. Indeed, I would argue that Dumo does not fully understand its consequences himself, and the rest of his theory weakens the very structuralist interpretation he explicitly advocates. But what exactly does Dumo mean by the structuralist nature of caste? Dumo writes, quote, in the middle region of the caste system, in particular, it is often difficult to rank one of two given castes absolutely in relation to the other. Happily, things change if one considers the principles whereby the castes are ranked in a more or less exact order. Underlying this order is found a system of oppositions, a structure. We shall speak of structure exclusively in this case. When the interdependence of the elements of a system is so great that they disappear without residue, if an inventory is made of the relations between them, a system of relations, in short, not a system of elements, okay, a system of relations. This structuralist approach, which relegates the importance of the elements and focuses instead on the relations between them, can perhaps more easily be grasped by reference to a hypothetical illustration. It is very important to note the use of an established convention in this illustration. Proper names which designate a caste group will be in the uppercase, for example, potters, while occupations will be in the lower case, for example, potters with capital P, small p. Thus, the potters of village X are not potters, but farmers. So, yeah, potters with capital P are not potters in with capital with small p, meaning actual real life potters in village Y. This is for exactly the same reason that one might say of English surnames. People called Smith are not usually Smiths. Imagine then a group of people inhabiting a set of neighboring villages who call themselves and are known to others as the Potters with capital P. इनका सबका surname है Potter, ठीक है, Harry Potters, okay? Perhaps these people did once derive their income from pottery, but the development of factory-made glass, metal, and plastic products, which are cheaper, more durable, and easier to clean, has made this particular craft redundant, which is why Harry Potter does not make pots with his wand. The potters, therefore, were obliged to seek alternative sources of livelihood, perhaps as farm laborers, or as rickshaw pullers, taxi drivers, or minor government employees in a nearby town. Yet they continue to refer to themselves and are referred to by others as potters. They marry only among themselves and are careful not to accept certain kinds of food from castes which they consider lower, for example, tailors. Even though many of the tailors do not actually work cloth, but are also farm laborers, rickshaw pullers, taxi drivers, and menial civil servants. Perhaps to make matters more awkward still, the tailors, meaning tailors with capital T, so people whose surnames are Taylor but are not tailors in real life, they assert that it is they who are in fact superior in status to the potters and not the reverse, as the potters claim. This kind of claim and counterclaim is a very frequently observed phenomenon in caste organized communities. Questioning members of other disinterested groups fails to resolve the issue. Some people think tailors are higher, others think the potters are higher. Quite a few people have no idea which are higher and which lower and don't seem to care particularly one way or the other. Everyone, however, including the don't knows, is agreed that they are of unequal status and should not intermarry. Here the problem lies, and this is what we must solve. Clearly, the principle of group definition is not current occupation, right? It must be based on something else. Perhaps it may not even safely be related to occupations or specialist functions performed in the past. Possibly these functions or occupations were given up many generations ago, so long ago that it is not at all clear if they were ever actually performed by these groups. Nevertheless, even though there is no evidence that potters were even potters, nor that tailors were even tailors, yet potters and tailors keep rigidly apart and will not exchange their women nor certain kinds of food, nor will they share in each other's ritual. And thus, I think the Savarkarite argument here would be that, or let's say even the Kushal Mehra, that it's so ambiguous anyway, so why not let this go? And no one from any other group is able to adduce an unambiguous objective criterion to judge one way or the other who is higher and who is lower. But of course, the counter to the Kushal Mehra argument would be that therefore we must look at the status of the person and not the caste of the person. And the problem that persists today is because of the status. Of course, that status is, of course, it's not like it's not completely dissociated from economics, which is why overall economic prosperity can change the game more. What are we to make of all this? Let us recall Dumont's felicitous solution. Quote, happily things change if one considers the principles whereby the castes are ranked in a more or less exact order. End quote. Note well the implication that all castes must be ranked in a more or less exact order. No one can agree on the other, but everyone apparently agrees that there ought to be some order. So what is the principle which underlies that belief? That principle, says Dumont, is the oppositional idiom in which differences of status are expressed. Oh my god, he arrived at that. Status. We are here, guys. Nandish, does he talk about the caste system in non-Hindu communities? Not in this paper. I don't know if he has spoken about it in other places. Harry Potter didn't follow his Jati duty. Yes. Harry Potter or Harry Potter? Yeah. So capital P. DN Bhattacharya is asking, is this Quigley related to Cal Quigley? No idea. He is from Edinburgh, St. Andrews University. Okay. That principle, says Dumont, is the oppositional idiom in which differences of status are expressed, namely purity and impurity. It is this simple opposition which structures relations between all castes. Because of the fact that there is a quote-unquote multiplicity of concrete criteria for evaluating purity and impurity, it is not always clear who is higher and who is lower, but the principle itself is indisputable. This raises an immediate problem. Dumont's structuralist method is a means to avoid what he calls the substantialist fallacy, that is, the tendency to consider castes as concrete, discrete groups. Yet in the preceding argument, Dumont appears to be doing precisely the same thing himself. Dumont says, the principles whereby the castes are ranked in a more or less exact order, end quote. This question of whether or not castes are real or substantial groups is never fully clarified by Dumont, which is unfortunate since a great deal depends on its resolution. On the one hand, Dumont wants to dismiss the common dichotomy of caste and subcaste by insisting that this is always a relative matter. Dumont says, quote, it is useless to claim to make a choice of level in order to define the real group. Seen from the outside, from the overall point of view or from that of another caste, it is the caste which appears seen from the inside. It is segmented at least into subcastes and in practice into territorial fragments of the subcaste. The diverse characteristics of the caste are not borne by a group at a unique level. Okay? The diverse characteristics of the caste are not borne by a group, by a quote-unquote group at a unique level, but they are borne by groups at different levels of segmentation. Dumont writes this in 1980. What exactly any of these groups looks like is something which Dumont does not go into in any detail. Indeed, he makes a virtue out of this, insisting that one must distinguish quote-unquote between theory and practice, between ideology and that which is yielded by observation, without sacrificing one to the other. End quote. Fair enough. On the other hand, the need to confront the observations presented in various census and ethnographic reports raises the problem of what to call the various groups which they identify as castes and subcastes. In a rather convoluted footnote, Dumont first implicitly endorses the use of the terms caste and subcaste, then says that the quote-unquote real group is something else, something which is produced, it is not clear how, by the territorial factor. I guess the region is also important. So Dumont was getting at something, right? Quote, this is Dumont's writing. We can agree with Mayer in saying roughly that relations within the village are relations between different castes, except for relations within the local group of the subcaste, which are agnetic relations in this case. Okay, listen to this. We can relations within the village are relations between different castes. Okay, whereas relations within the caste are always relations within the subcaste. Fair enough, except for rare relations between different subcastes of the same caste, and unite people from several villages. In one passage, Mayer, interpreting Blunt, seems to say that caste and subcaste, having different attributes, are groups of different kinds. Actually, these attributes, some external, the others internal, are complementary. Some external, these attributes, the attributes are sometimes external, some of them are internal. They are complementary. I would rather say that there are not two groups, but that the real group, quote unquote, which some have sought to discover, is constituted by the complicated configuration of the quote unquote caste, the subcaste, etc., as qualified by the territorial factor. I am not a member of two different groups. I am a member of one complex group which has different aspects and functions at different levels. Kind of seems like the Hindutva argument, kind of a Savarkarite argument, no? So there are, it seems, quote unquote, although Declan Quigley is opposed to this. So let's see. So there are, it seems, quote unquote, real groups, though the complex question of their constitution is never broached. This should not be taken as an oversight. The territorial factor, as Dumont calls it, is an empirical fact, which we need not to be too concerned about. For Dumont, the study of caste is the study of ideology. And here, the ideology, quote unquote, the ideology ignores territory as such. Chalo, fir se problem shuru. It is the difficulty of defining what a caste is in isolation, of establishing its boundaries, which leads Dumont to look at the system as a whole and the way in which this system is structured. This is a crucial advance on the majority of rival explanations. Any attempt to define what castes are has run into insuperable difficulties. Okay, any attempt to define what castes are has run into insuperable difficulties. Castes are groups which are differentiated from other groups in terms of purity, but where and why does one draw the line? Let me have a sip of coffee now. Let me check some comments. Nandish is saying the BBC's 2013 Great British Class Survey identified 7 distinct social classes in the UK, ranging from the elite to the precariat, and that absolutely is a caste system. They are all status groups, Max Weber would say. Let's see, descendants of Bharat, what is saying. Me, a fool, believe untouchability and caste atrocities are an overhyped British narrative. Jagadguru Puri Shankaracharya ji made me realize Hindus like him practiced it with pride. He compares the list with enough to explain Truth science in one of his video. Oh no, my god, did he? I have no idea. Okay, Shatra Bhavan is saying, regarding intermarriage with Jatis, Varnas, even the Dharma Shastras that encourage endogamy do not completely prohibit mixed marriages, which is not how it's seen today. Yeah. Savarkar knew it. Okay, let's see. Arthur Any Donuts is saying, Savarkar knew it won't go away by itself, only when people can move caste, like how he went around Maharashtra teaching Dalits to make them Brahmins and let them work in temples. Okay, Aris is saying, I disagree with Punjab the Charvakar's many opinions, but I do agree with his views about annihilation of Jati, Varna, caste, and identity. See, what do you mean by annihilation and how do you go about it? That is the main, I think, difference. Everyone is like people like J. Sai Deepak, KIM, Kushal Mehra, all are opposed to caste-based bad behavior. And listen to what I had analyzed in the conversation between Ashish Dhar and J. Sai Deepak. That was pretty progressive. I think many were on the, let's say, on the even the, let's say, actual trad caste-based bad behavior endorsing people would actually dislike what Ashish Dhar and J. Sai Deepak, especially J. Sai Deepak, said. He said that you have to be, you want to be Hindu. When has anyone been stopped from being Hindu? You can be even an Arya Samaji, ISKCON, etc., or Baps who don't follow the orthodox caste or the Jati Varna system. So, which shows that J. Sai Deepak is actually in favor of those sects as well. Caste can never go away because it exists in every religion and culture, as Raul is saying, because humans are born unequal, which is what I was saying, that status-based bad behavior will never go away. So how about we all just try to manage staticism, critique staticism when necessary, and break down that staticism system, only to give rise to some other staticism, which will be again taken care of by posterity, by some future generations. You can't have this, you can't wait for that imaginary pill or solution which will take care of staticism forever and after. We will live all happily ever after. Wo nahi hoga. I wish Declan was here. Yes. Status groups went away in the US, which is why M. Shastri, it's a good point. We can argue how much it went away, etc. But staticism in USA is pretty low because, like, we have discussed this previously in some live stream, that like in any MMA gym, any Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym, okay, the biggest fighters, the biggest world champions, okay, let's say today, if you go into Canada's TriStar gym, okay, oh, M. Shastri, you are from Canada, right? TriStar gym run by Firaz Zahabi. George St. Pierre trains there every day. I think the fees is about like $25. So if you're a beginner, any day you can just go to that class. You are not going to train with George St. Pierre, obviously, but you'll see him training right in front of you. And some truck driver, some construction worker is also saving up and trying to learn MMA, BJJ in the same gym. Some professor, some let's say tier 2 celebrities, at least. Maybe Brad Pitt will have a separate trainer for himself in his house, but at least tier 2 celebrities, okay? People like Tom Hardy, which I would say is who I would say is tier 2, because he's not the Will Smith, Brad Pitt level people. They are training. They are getting Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu blue belt, purple belts, everything. The Narcos guy recently got his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu purple belt. This proves that staticism has gone away. Whereas, and also economics is obviously factor. Okay, how can someone, how is Firaz Zahabi keeping the price at such a place where a truck driver and a celebrity can afford the same training? How is that happening? Okay, there is something to look at there as well. But the staticism is gone. GSP doesn't think, I won't train on the days when these beginner fuckers come in. Okay, you will never see those kinds of things here. It has gone away to some extent. I think in the gyms, a lot of people, I think when they go to train, some they see some celebrity models and stuff in their gyms. I don't go to a gym, so I don't know exactly. But staticism is a big problem in India. And actually, you see, staticism is a very weird problem in India in a different way, which I think is a let's say a remnant of the caste system. You will either see people in India saying that this job is a loser's job. I'm too above this job. Okay, he's not saying this based on any his caste or the other person's caste. He just thinks some jobs are just too low for him. Okay, which I think is absolutely a remnant of the caste system, because he also says some jobs are way out of his capabilities. For some jobs, he gets an inferiority complex. He thinks that's so out of my reach. I can't even imagine doing that unless he listens to some motivational speaker. So that kind of attitude that maybe that job might be interesting. Let me just try my hand at it. Let this phrase of "let me just try my hand at it" is very lacking among Indians, which I think is a remnant of the caste system. That you think either some jobs are extremely low, you are way above that job, or you think that job is absolutely out of your capabilities. Okay, let me continue with the paper now. Where were we? Yeah. Where and why does one draw the line? As we just saw, however, Dumo was not entirely successful in doing away with castes altogether, and nor indeed has anyone else been. I would argue that Dumo's own particular difficulties with the nature of caste affiliation stem from his systematic misrepresentation of the fact that being a Brahman by caste has not necessarily anything at all to do with being a priest or being related to priests. This is, in my view, one of the more peculiar mistakes repeatedly made by theorists of caste. It is all very well for Rajputs not to be warriors or for washermen to be farm laborers. But somehow the association of Brahmins with priesthood, as if this were a necessary association, has been much harder to resolve. Brilliant point. See, the exact critique of, I guess, the people opposing Kushal Mehra here would argue that is the main problem. Everyone kind of admits that, yeah, Rajputs may or may not be warriors, but Brahmins' association with priesthood just doesn't go away from academia. Okay, Vivek Ramaswamy apparently, or J. Sai Deepak, does puja pat in a temple. We are supposed to believe. It is, I believe, the most pervasively misleading notion about caste in general circulation. In Dumo's case, this misunderstanding might have been avoided had he respected his own interdictions against conceiving of the caste system in terms of substantial entities, quote-unquote substantial entities. However, against Indian, I would suggest that the real trouble with the picture presented by Dumo and many others is not so much that caste is substantialized, as the bigger problem is that purity is substantialized. By turning purity into a priestly substance, something which priests have, and impurity into something which low castes have, Dumo demonstrates that he has simultaneously misunderstood the connection between caste and kinship, and that between caste and ritual functions. Purity, as Mary Douglas taught us, is a relational concept, not a substance. Well said. Purity is the absence of impurity, and this is an entirely relative matter in any culture. The question is not what is impurity or what is impurity. The question is not what is purity or what is impurity or who has them, but what are purity and impurity relative to. Brilliant point. Indian's 1986 argument about the substantialization of caste is, of course, very different from Dumo's about the substantialization of castes. For Indian, the European obsession with caste derives essentially from a desire to find some mysterious other, the Oriental, who does not think quite like we do. According to this view, the anthropologist's preoccupation with caste is essentially a derivative of more generalized Orientalist illusions, a product of the Western observer's peculiarly imperialist designs. The most curious feature of this argument is that it implies that the only possible picture of caste society must look something like Dumo's. In that picture, Brahmins are at the top of the caste system, and they are so because they are the most pure. Declan Quigley is critiquing everyone. Finding this scenario rightly problematic, Indian appears to deduce not that Dumo's answer to the problem is mistaken, but that the problem itself does not really exist. Brilliant. One of the principal defects of the preoccupation with caste, argues Indian, so what is the exact defect, is that it ignores the fundamental institution of kingship. Kingship, okay, not kinship. Therefore, any theory of Indian society which insists that caste is the central institution must be misleading. What makes this line of reasoning rather odd in Indian's particular case is that he quotes Hocart in admiration during the course of his argument. Hocart's theory, which has been widely ignored since it was dismissed as false by Dumo, is simultaneously a theory of caste and kingship. The central argument is that caste develops out of traditional kingship and the assignment of particular functions to particular families, quote unquote, in the performance of the royal ritual. In Hocart's theory, which echoes the traditional Buddhist view, it is not priests who are the first caste, but kings. Not those who perform the ritual, but those who command its performance. Kind of sounds like Japan now. Okay, let me check some comments now. Buddhadev is asking a very brilliant question. It's a very subtle question. Is that not based on reality, that some jobs are really above us, barrier to entry is so high that you can't just try? No, I would disagree, Buddhadev, that one must always have the attitude of giving it a shot. It might actually be out of your grasp. Okay, if you are let's say 5'2", if you are Sachin Tendulkar's height, you should not think that no, basketball musse nahi hoga. You should try it, because with any effort to anything, you might end up getting better at something else. Okay, let's say I have one big advantage over many people who are, I guess, as educated as me, more educated than me, but won't be able to start a podcast like mine because they don't have this technological know-how, right? I have this complete setup with me because I'm a music producer anyway. Okay, so imagine today I give up music. Was I wrong to try being a musician? But the skills I learned from that profession or that field are being translated here only. Okay, mic quality, what mic to buy, how to handle the sound card, all this I know for the last 13-14 years. Okay, and similarly, how am I being able to read a sociology, anthropology research paper, even though I'm a college dropout? Because I just loved reading English storybooks. I love reading Bengali storybooks. I have a general grasp on language as a whole. Okay, and I like let's say watching English movies, English podcasts. So what if I said that what's the point of this listening to this podcast? What's the point of watching that English movie? Why shouldn't I focus on my work more? I would not be able to read this paper. So having that courage to try anything and any fucking random thing is going to be very, very beneficial. And Sachin Tendulkar himself says that if you want to get to a moon, you must at least shoot for the sun and stuff. Then maybe you'll get to the moon at least. Mira Tripathi, but you can see small height people in basketball exception. Yeah, maybe some. Okay. Now, even, let's see. Even in the US, only the coastal cities are the melting pot. Try going into sundowner towns. M. Shastri is saying, if you pick up a ritual, you are expected to maintain the practice and ritual purity. It's a tapasya. Descendants is saying, here in USA, Indians altogether will remain like lower castes in front of these whites because of the hidden racial superiority of such whites, which they reveal oftentimes casually or angrily to us. I see. Dada Praveen Swami says, Hindutva is inspiring similar movements in our hood like Nepal, Sri Lanka and Burma. Okay. Basavanna in the northern Karnataka tried to do that through social reform and they created a separate caste in his name. Jo kabhi na jati, wohi hai jati. There are several merits in such a view. Okay. The first is that it allows a scope for comparison, and indeed a significant portion of Hocart's essay is devoted to caste-like societies other than India, and a consideration of the relative functions of kingship, kinship, and ritual in different historical and sociological contexts. Dumo, by contrast, while claiming that only his approach allows comparison, at the same time asserts that the Indian case is unique because of its particular disjunction of status and power, and therefore defies comparison. The second advantage of Hocart's view of caste over Dumo's, and one which springs directly from the ability to see caste comparatively, is that those who practice caste no longer appear as mysterious. Orientals obsessed by purity and pollution. Or to be exact, they are no more obsessed than any other society. Purity in the Indian case can be seen as an expression of kinship boundaries, which are themselves intimately connected with the exercise of power, kingship, and its demonstration through ritual. Such a conception of caste does not require the implausible, even absurd disjunction of status and power on which Dumont's theory hangs, and which is the prime culprit in the portrayal of the obscurantist Hindu. On the contrary, status and power are conjoined, as Weber and history have demonstrated to be normal condition. But to accept this, one must accept that it is not the purity of priesthood which is the central axiom of caste, but the purity of kingship. In principle and in practice, what is at stake is the pedigree of or the purity of the ruling groups. Declan Quigley had kind of touched upon this in another paper which we had discussed. I don't remember the name of the paper. If anyone can remember that discussion, just let me know in the comment section. I don't remember the name of that paper. A third advantage of this picture is that the sacrificial theory of the Varnas, in which different sections of society have each a crucial function to play in the perpetual regeneration of social and cosmic harmony, can be seen as a genuine reflection on the world and not as merely priestly mystification. However odd the Vedic preoccupation with sacrificial ritual might appear to the modern man, Hocart maintained that it was not simply nonsense and could not be summarily dismissed as a quote-unquote pure figment or the invention of priests for their own glorification, end quote. The generic view which he scornfully attributed to 19th and early 20th century European scholars of Hinduism, caste ideology in which quote-unquote every occupation is a priesthood, can thus be taken seriously without succumbing to the version preferred by one particular group, the Brahmins, as Dumont does. What a great quote. Every occupation is a priesthood. Yeah, status of Brahmins. One further advantage is that the pairing of the king and the priest, on which Dumont also places a great deal of emphasis, can be preserved. The logic of the pairing is, however, reversed. It is not that the priest requires the king to maintain temporal order, but exactly the opposite. The king requires the priest's ritual to underscore his legitimacy, to turn force into moral order, exactly. And the Brahmins are known for, one of the major things Brahmins are known to do, if you're not a complete not job, is this. This is how the Vedic civilization, or let's say the Aryans, the Arya civilization at least, amalgamated with the rest of the country. This is how. This is why people believing in Panjuli, Guliga, they are all Hindus today. This is the job of Brahmins, sanctioning things, maybe in exchange of money, land, ritual. That I will be the guy hired to do your rituals. I will be the guy hired to, let's say, draw up your family tree, okay? But in exchange of that money, maybe you can think of this as an evil. Why did he charge money? Why didn't he do it for free? But he, in the end, whether it was well-intentioned or not, in the end, whether he wanted this to happen or not, in the end, what Brahmins ended up doing was uniting an entire landmass. Let's say, amalgamating, okay, that sewing that entire cloth today, okay, tying these different threads in exchange of money, power, okay, status, maybe, of course, status. But that is what was done by the Brahmins. He is the guy who sanctions, okay, like the paper we discussed of by Hitesh Ranjan Channal, that everyone is hiring random Brahmins to declare themselves the higher castes, which is why today we have this confusion. Everyone has random made up family trees, okay. Now, the incentive back then was to, of course, identify as higher caste. Today, the incentive is to identify as oppressed, lower caste, because the reservations are there. Remove economic incentives and let free markets happen. 90% of this problem goes away. Now, let's see. The king requires the priest's ritual to underscore his legitimacy, to turn force into moral order. For the most part, Europeans have failed to provide a plausible alternative to. I think this is what something I guess you could argue BJP does not understand. No matter who, the way of the Indian society or the way of society in general is that, I think mainly Indian society, unless you are not trying to do it just by force, what Congress, communists, Trinamool, these kind of people have always done is that they have used force and they have, let's say, paid the Brahmins to do their work in a way. The Brahmins in this case, in this conversation, meaning the academics, that you legitimize my rule, you sanction my rule, you say why my rule is, you do a critique of it. Okay, if you are a complete paid hack, just say only great things about me, or I'll pay, maybe I'm paying you a little less money, and you do an honest critique, you say both good things and bad things. Whereas BJP has turned its face away from Brahmins absolutely in today's context, Brahmins of today. Let's say Narendra Modi is a king. He thinks his rule does not need force, nor does it need sanction of Brahmins. He thinks it will happen on its own. And I think that's a big mistake. For the most part, Europeans have failed to provide a plausible alternative to the Brahmanic interpretation of Indian society. Indian is quite justified in castigating them for this, because there are two quite misleading implications in this interpretation. The first is the equation of Brahman with priest. As Hocart and many other ethnographers have pointed out, washermen by caste need not be washermen by trade. Similarly, Brahmins by caste need not be Brahmins, i.e. priests by profession. They can be virtually anything they choose, and a perusal of ethnographies of caste organized communities will lead one quickly to the conclusion that most Brahmins are either agriculturists or administrators, not priests. And in the case of West Bengal, they are mostly artists, who would be Shudras in the Chanakyan sense. The second misconception is that Brahmins are exalted because the priest is the pivot of the religious system. For Hindus, as Hocart made clear, the priest is the instrument of a powerful man, a judgman, okay, patron, the archetype of whom is the king. What made the Brahmins into quote unquote the first caste subsequent to British rule was precise. What did he just say? Brahmins became the first caste subsequent to British rule. Can of worms. Was precisely that they were no longer seen by the general populace as instruments of the ruler, whether as priests or scribes, but as rulers themselves. They were quite correctly seen by all, natives and British alike, to be an integral part of the British Raj. In fact, in a way, Brahmins were now seen to be the Raj, because the British handed over to them what had traditionally been regarded as the primary responsibility of the ruler. So fuck. To regulate the moral order of the world as it was encapsulated in each caste organized community. This is Declan Quigley basically saying that the British made the caste system worse. They gave all the powers to the Brahmins. The principal function of the king was not simply to rule, to administer, but to rule well. Yogakshem. To be king was to be the representative of the gods on earth, to ensure justice, prosperity, and order for all within the kingdom. Caste, the regulation of social order by the allocation of particular functions to particular lineages within the kingdom, was the primary means by which this was achieved. The British did not attempt to dismantle what they perceived to be Hindu religion. On the contrary, they effectively abdicated any responsibility for social issues which appeared to them to be primarily religious. Of greatest relevance here is that they refused to intervene in caste disputes or to adjudicate on the relative position of castes in the belief that this was the responsibility of Brahman priests. In fact, this had always been the responsibility of the king, not the priest, though Brahmins often played an advisory role. In a way, the responsibility of the traditional Indian king was to be the final arbiter of social, that is, religious and political order. In the new regime, the resolution of such moral questions fell less to priests, as the British fondly imagined, than it did to the bureaucrats who administered the British Raj. It was primarily the responsibility of civil servants to decide who was who in the census-derived pecking order of the new imperial regime. These bureaucrats were, for the most part, Brahmins by caste. They were Brahmins because this was one of the primary traditional functions of Brahmins, not simply to be priests in the narrow sense of the term, i.e. Ritual practitioners, but to be in the fullest sense king's counselors, as Hocart put it in another book. Let me have a sip of coffee. If one accepts this argument, it obviously becomes unnecessary to claim or imply that Europeans, by stressing that caste was the most distinctive feature of India, were effectively creating a fiction. Europeans, for generation after generation, simply transcribed what their Brahman informants told them. Could one say then that it was these Brahmins who invented caste? This would be to credit them with singular capacities of imagination and unity of purpose. Unity of purpose तो है नहीं किसी का. A less fanciful hypothesis is that what these Brahmins did was simply to reflect upon the situation as they saw it. That is, to explain their own exalted position, a position which the Europeans had made unambiguous by usurping the authority of the traditional kings. The singular advantage of this argument is that it does not involve accusing anyone of deliberately manipulating the truth. Conspiracy theories of human society always sound rather weak. The idea that caste is largely a figment of the Orientalist imagination is potentially very damaging because it can easily undermine the immeasurable contribution made by intensive fieldwork investigations of caste organized communities. For the holier than thou deconstructionist critic, caste is simply a construct of Western imperialists intent on subjugating by all possible means the irrational Asiatic. But if, as I have argued, one follows Hocart, caste ceases to be the mysterious product of the fertile imagination of either the Brahman or the conspiratorial colonialist. Instead, it becomes the quite comprehensible product of particular historical forces. The retention of caste as an explanatory framework for Indian social organization does not then preclude the consideration of kingship or politics more generally, as Indian and latterly Dirks, Janki Bakle's husband, both seem to suggest. On the contrary, Hocart's theory shows that it is perfectly possible to have a theory of caste which is simultaneously a theory of power. Moreover, it is a plausible theory, which is to say, it explains observable or recorded facts of history and ethnography. This is the central difficulty with the disdain of facts shown by both Dumont and Inden. It leads Dumont to produce a wholly implausible theory, where Inden's theory leads one can only guess. The issue of caste is only one way in which one might answer those who tend to dismiss the Orientalists wholesale, though in my view, it is a particularly illuminating way. This is only to scratch the surface of the full implications behind Inden's argument. Some of his statements strike me as quite fantastic. Two examples. One, Inden says, the intellectual activities of the Orientalist have even produced in India the very Orient which it constructed in its discourse. This is indeed the ultimate logic of the new wave deconstructionist argument, which is, it is no longer as old idealism had it, that their ideas produce their universe. Now it is our ideas which produces their world. If the original idealist argument was false, it was not entirely absurd, as its successor is. 2. All humans are constrained by the same indeterminate reality. Has functionalist anthropology the idea that human institutions can be understood in their context and only in their context been consigned to the scrap heap? Do they have this idea? A further statement would appear to undermine the comparative foundation of the anthropological enterprise, which is, quote, Indians are, for perhaps the first time since colonization, showing sustained signs of reappropriating the capacity to represent themselves, and in many ways that converge with the suggestions I am about to make. Can only Indians and Indian accurately represent India? Will a South Indian Brahmin from a professional family understand Himalayan peasants any more automatically than a European intellectual? I think not. In any case, I thought representational views of knowledge had been disallowed to all. Now it seems that some of us are allowed to represent the other, while some of us are not. Have the rules been changed, or have they not? So ends this with a question. Nice. Okay, guys, this was the end of the paper. I'll check some comments and then leave and try to come back as soon as possible by 8:30 with the next paper. Let's see some comments now. M. Shastri is saying the British, in British ruled Bengal, it was Bengali Brahmins, as majority of them used to be part of Brahmo Samaj, and Brahmo Samaj spread AIT in Bengal extensively. Yes, they did. Would Napoleon's decision to crown himself rather than be crowned by the Pope, was it a mistake? Perhaps, in hindsight. Only wealth, resources, and prosperity is actual and OG power rather than castehood. Shudra King Dhananand was more powerful than his contemporary Kshatriya rulers. Only wealth, resources, and prosperity can't do it, guys. Let's say today in any village, okay, your local school headmaster is walking by and Ambani is walking by. Whose feet will you touch? पेपर्स लिंक हिंदू विचारधारा शो. ये पेपर ना मेरे कंप्यूटर में डाउनलोड हो चुका है, तो ये मुझे भेजा गया था, मिस्ट्री सोशोलॉजिस्ट ने भेजा था. सो आई डोंट नो वेयर इट कैन. आई थिंक इट विल बी फाउंड इन JSTOR or it will be found in libgen.rs. okay, LIB, B for Bombay, GEN, G for Gandu, jn.rs. Okay. So the name of the paper is the title which we discussed in the beginning. Descendants is saying, why nearly every Bengali Brahmins are communist and socialist? Bengal Communist Party comprises abundance of. Oh, we have discussed this countless times, but the short answer is that because caste is not, caste has nothing to do with Hinduism. Caste had something to do with Hinduism. Today's castes are a remnant of a once Hindu society. But what in Bengal we have is just what we have everywhere is staticism. But Bengal staticism is still based on the ancient Varna Jati system, because Bengal played that kind of politics. The evil politics of Bengal has made sure that people who were in a dominant position in terms of conversation and respect, they remain forever in those positions, because all of these people conveniently change sides whenever required. Okay, when communism is in vogue, all the Brahmins are immediately communist. When nationalism is in vogue, all the Brahmins are immediately nationalist. When Trinamool is in power, all of a sudden, all Brahmins of Bengal are saying that Hindutva is fascist. Mamata Banerjee is a strong female leader. What's AIT? Aryan Invasion Theory. Is capitalism best way to end social discrimination because it results in urbanization? Yes, and also because you can't. You need to be skilled at the service you are providing, and you need to be an employer who just is looking for the best service at the cheapest rate. Estraul is saying nope. I disagree. Dada, what do you think about a website where you can contribute articles and share papers? What do you mean by what do I think about a website? You mean make such a website? I guess I have 3-4 articles in the Op India Voice column, so I'm happy with that because I don't write too much anyway. Okay. Now so I'll end this live stream now. Okay. I'm coming back soon by 8:30 with an insane paper. I'll give you a spoiler. Are there Dalits in Japan? Okay. Thank you guys for joining. Bye bye.
श्रवरूढं महाभीमं गुणाद्रष्टाम्बरप्रदम् हस्य युक्तं त्रिनेत्रं च कपालकर्णिकाकरां मुक्तकेशीं ललज्जयं पिबन्तीं रुधिरं चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् चतुर्बाहु समायुक्तं वराभयकरं स्मरेत् काली काली महाकाली कालिके पापहारिणी धर्मर्थ मोक्षदे देवी नारायणी नमोस्तुते धर्मर्थ मोक्षदे देवी